Hello and welcome to the Heat Check, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat Show. I'm David Wilson, and I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, what's going on?
Much, David. How are you?
Pretty good. I was late night last night in Sunrise.
Yeah.
We'll see if the Panthers. We'll do maybe a little Panthers minute at the end, but still, I'm not panicked yet, but it's getting a little hairy for them. I was expecting it to be a late night of getting ready to write about a championship last night. Instead, it was just a late night of, a typical finals game late night, as you've obviously experienced in the past too.
I'm going to take the Levitard route here and say, think about how awesome a Game 7 in Sunrise would be. That would be fun. Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be fun? I know Panthers fans don't want to see that to bring up 3-0, but man, come on. If you tell me before the season, Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final in Sunrise, playing for the championship.
I'll say I think our own Greg Cody had his come to McJesus moment last night a little bit too.
Yeah, he's pretty good. I don't know if I would call him overrated at this point.
We can talk about this when I get to. I'll save it for the end. My Connor McDavid take, which is not. I don't think it's that controversial, but all right. We got a couple things we wanted to hit on today. Draft coming up. I guess we'll maybe record next week ahead of the draft too, right? What day?
I think we'll record
the 27th, right?
It's the 26th. It's Wednesday. So I think we might record early next week and maybe have an episode up. Definitely by Wednesday morning, I would say.
Yes. Okay. So we'll do a little draft talk today, kind of an early preview. But we wanted to start, I guess, just by talking about the new free agency negotiating period, which is opened yesterday, right? The day after the finals ended. Anthony, you wrote about it this week. Do you want to give, I guess, some of the quick background and maybe how it is different, maybe than how maybe it changes the way free agency works as opposed to years in the past? Doesn't seem like it's going to be a major difference, but obviously some small changes because of it. Yeah,
definitely some tweaks. And I love how we were just going to run past the fact that the Celtics won the championship in true Heat podcast fashion. We didn't even mention that. Who cares? The finals do
one Heat one finals take.
The Celtics are very good.
They're good.
They were the best. They were the best team all season, and they dominated in the playoffs. Whether you want to say that their competition was injured, which they were, but they took care of business. They were the best team all regular season. Not a surprise. Dominant, one of the most dominant teams really in NBA history when you consider their net rating and all that. So the best team won. Congrats to them. They definitely are worthy champions. But that's about all we'll say at this point. So now that the finals are over, literally at midnight of when the clock struck midnight after the Celtics won the championship, an hour after they won, teams can officially begin talking to their own free agents about new contracts. That's new. It used to be that teams had to wait until June 30 at 6 p.m. to speak to all free agents. Now you only have to wait until June 30 to speak to outside free agents, so basically free agents from other teams. So that gives teams a little bit of a head start on kind of guys with player options. They can talk to guys with, that have options in their contracts. They can talk to guys who are going to be unrestricted free agents with no options in their contracts. They can talk to guys who are extension eligible up until basically if they're extension eligible between now and July 6th. If it's after July 6th, like Jimmy Butler, you still can't talk to him yet. But like Bam Adebayo, for instance, the Heat can't talk to Bam. He's eligible starting July 6th to sign an extension. So he is able to talk to the Heat already. So I don't know how much it's going to change things. I wouldn't expect too many agree. Obviously, you have to wait until July 6th to sign most contracts formally, but you could still Pascal Siakam today, for instance, recording this on Wednesday. He agreed to an extension reportedly with the Pacers.
Yeah.
How many commitments are there going to be between now and June 30, during this early period? I wouldn't think too much other than maybe some extension guys. Because if you're a free agent, most of the time you're going to at least want to test the open market, right? It doesn't make sense for most guys just to commit right now without seeing what other offers are out there. And honestly, my point that I wanted to make on the episode is I don't know how much it changes for the Heat either. If I'm the Heat, maybe use the last couple of days of this window before June 30 to talk to some of these guys. But if you're the Heat, you want to see how the draft shakes out. Are you going to make a draft night trade? You're not committing money right now to any of these guys, probably, right? So I wouldn't expect like many deals to get done, especially on the Heat side, between now and June 30. Maybe one, maybe one or two, but I wouldn't expect most of I think most of the guys are still going to hit the open market. What it does help with is I think the Heat will have a good idea before the June 29 deadline of those player options of Thomas Bryant, Kevin Love, Jay Rich, Caleb, of what those guys are going to do because they can talk to them, right, as of yesterday. So I think they'll probably have a really good idea of what those guys are going to do before that deadline, which gives them an advantage because they're able to kind of work, with a little better information. I think the one thing we do know is it hasn't been formally decided yet, I guess, or announced, but I would expect obviously Caleb to opt out, right? He can get more money, more years in the open market. I think I wouldn't be a surprise if he opts out before the June 29 deadline. That hasn't been officially decided yet, but I would expect that. The other guys, Thomas Bryant, Jay Rich, Kevin Love, I would think Jay Rich and Kevin Love will be back and opt in. Thomas Bryant, I'm kind of 50-50, depending on if he wants to sign a minimum elsewhere to get more playing time. But yeah, I think that might be the biggest advantage he has during this time is that they have a better idea of what those guys might do with those options.
Yeah. In terms of I guess the rest of the league, are there advantages you think of just kind of knowing? I mean, not that it's just a Heat specific advantage, but do you think this rule is going to give us any more kind of clarity of what other what the free agent market might look like, what the trade are there clues we can get, do you think, from just maybe other teams? Like you said, Pascal's that's a big one, probably gonna be the biggest one. I don't know, can dominoes start to fall maybe a little bit earlier because of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Donovan Mitchell's a big one, right? He has that extension.
Yeah.
He has that extension kind of basically waiting for him if he wants to sign it. Will he sign it? I think him in Cleveland, I believe, because I think he's eligible July 6th to sign that extension. So he's one of those guys like Bam that could already begin talking to Cleveland. So if he's going to sign the extension, it wouldn't be a surprise to see, just like Pascal Siakam, Woj, or somebody else report that Donovan Mitchell and Cleveland have agreed to a contract extension that's going to keep him in Cleveland. So that's going to be a big domino, right? Does he sign that? That takes somebody off the board of kind of the whale for the Heat this offseason. Yeah. Does he not sign it? And all of a sudden that indicates maybe he's going to test, he's not going to sign the extension and he might be available via trade. I think that's the big one that the Heat and other teams are waiting on. And then besides that, if there are commitments made between impending free agents and their own teams, the next few days, that does thin out the free agent market a little bit too. So it will change things a little bit. Obviously, this is a new rule. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it's drastic, but it's a pretty big difference where you could talk to a guy basically 2 weeks ahead of time. So there are going to be obviously inherent changes, but I don't think it's going to change it so much that they're going to get to June 30 and nobody's going to be available because everyone's signed with their new team. All these guys made commitments like that. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there'll be maybe a few commitments here and there. I still think most guys are going to test the open market.
Mm-hmm. All right, should we get into some draft stuff?
Yeah, let's do it.
Got anything else? All right. Like we said, we are probably going to come back next week. Talk maybe. We'll see. This draft has been very strange to follow. I have no idea who's going to go number one. I have no idea what the top 5 might look like. Guys who we think could be top 10 picks could easily fall to the Heat at 15. Guys who we think, maybe even are popping up with top 6, 7, 8, I think could fall all the way down there because this is going to be a draft that's, I think, all about individual preferences, not just a clear cut. I think there's probably a tier of 7 guys who I would kind of be feel like they're the guys who are in the mix for those top handful of teams. Then there are a couple other guys who I don't think are in that, have a shot to go top 3 or 4, but, a Dalton Connect just seems like he's not going to make it to the Heat, even though he's not one of those top tier prospects, just guys who are, have a certain degree of value, but, the mocks are all over the place. I've got the Ringers one up now, and a guy like Devin Carter, who maybe we'll start with him because that seems like he would be in some ways like the home run. They have him 7th right now on their big board. I think ordinarily, if you're drafting at 15, you would think a guy who's projected to go that high, pretty unlikely to fall that far. But this is a 22-year-old, 6'2", like wing, and some teams are going to love him. He does a lot of interesting. His rebounding numbers are really good. For the Heat, obviously, he's got big local ties. And he's a guy who could go, I don't necessarily see him going higher than like 6, but at a guy who's ranked 7th, like easily you could see him potentially falling to 15, which I don't know if would be the case in some of these other drafts.
Yeah, I feel like as I try to accumulate a list for my draft preview of like guys in the Heat's range, usually it's like 15 guys, 10 to 15 guys. This year it's like over 20. I mean, it's because like you said, mocks are all over the place. Like there's not like a distinct like, okay, these are the top tier guys that are definitely going in the top 10 or like top 12.
It just feels like there's a pretty clear top 6, I think, at this point. Maybe 7, Dillingham, and I don't mean that those guys are necessarily going to be the top 7, but those are the guys who are like, feels like the teams that are in the top 3 range who are trying to take a big swing they're into. And then after that, it's like, who knows what's going to happen, because one of those guys could easily fall if the Spurs are like, oh, we want Dalton Connect because we want to try to be good right now, or like we fall in love with Cody Williams, who at one point was thought to be like a potential number 1 pick. So
or maybe somebody takes a chance on Topic from
or Topic for one point definitely seemed like a top pick before he got hurt. Or who knows what happens with Bronny? Like that's the ultimate wild card. So the numbers could quickly like pile up where all of a sudden a few guys are going way higher than we think, and someone who we think could be doesn't have a shot to fall into the Heat, all of a sudden does. So Devin Carter, we'll start with him because I mean he feels like the guy that like every Heat fan would be pretty happy with that, I think.
Yeah, if he's available, he's the guy I would take. Considering like somebody from the top 5 doesn't drop to 15 or something like that, right? Like if Devin Carter's available, I would take him. I just think he's obviously has a local ties. He's played at Doral Academy, which is kind of cool. Son of Anthony Carter, Heat player, former Heat assistant coach, now with Memphis, and he's just like a good all-around player, just solid, a guy who you can plug into the rotation like this season and probably give you good minutes, kind of like Jaime did, right? Yeah. Where he was able to play consistent minutes and on a good team, which a lot of rookies can't do. He could do it, and I think he fills needs too. Where he's a guard. You might have a lot of guards in this roster already, but he plays bigger than his size. He's 6'2", but he has a 6'9" wingspan.
Game, I think. Per game. 6'9"
wingspan, like a big guy. He's a good defender. Can probably guard up a position, probably guard some threes in the NBA. His 3-point shot improved drastically in college over the years. So you would think he continued to improve as a shooter. That's not the best part of his game. He's not a knockdown 3-point shooter, but he's not a bad 3-point shooter. Like I said, good rebounder, good cutter, can play off the ball. He seems like he's a good screener. Like he just fits with a lot of things that he'd like to do with their off-ball actions and all that. And just again, as a like point of attack defender, the Heat need that, especially if they're going to lose. They could lose guys like Caleb Haywood. All of a sudden, you're thin on perimeter defenders. Devin Carter could fill that need immediately. So I don't know if he's going to be there. Like I said, I think I'd probably be more surprised if he's there at 15 than if he got picked 6 or something like that. Like at this point, like he's just jumped so high on the boards over the pre-draft process that I'm assuming he's not going to be there. But if somehow he falls to 15. That would be the pick for me.
Yeah, there's him and Connect are kind of like the 2 old guys, right? Like the guys who were, I guess Connect was even, I think, maybe a 5-year guy in college, who, because of that, the teams that are like rebuilding aren't going to be looking at them. But like, I don't know, for me, the Spurs are interesting for all that because with Wembanyama, I think they're, then they've got 2 picks. Like they're gonna try to kind of start winning sooner rather than later, I would guess. So
and to that point, Kevin O'Connor, his latest mock draft that was updated a few days ago, he has Devin Carter going 8 to the Spurs.
yeah.
So
Like that makes sense to me. Like that feels like a Connect or Carter landing spot. Connect, it just doesn't seem like he's gonna fall because I think he's fascinating to guys in a lot of ways. Even though he's even older than Carter, and like typically those guys don't go in the top 10 at this point. I think he's fascinating to people because one, because he was a transferred up from a lower level. I think there's a feeling that he's like a late bloomer. And two, he was just probably the best player in the country last year at Tennessee in terms of certainly offensively, and was awesome in the tournament.
Shades of Max Strus is this NBA comp.
I think I feel like he's got a little bit more to his offensive game than that, but he's a sniper, and I think the Carter Jaquez comparison I think is pretty interesting, and because it is those guys became like the go-to players as their careers went on, right? Jaquez, both, I don't know if Carter I think was an All-American also, but 20-point a game scorers basically who had the ball in their hand a lot. But I think also like Jaquez was really good as a role player early in his career, and Carter has a lot of like a guy who at the college level got to do a ton. Maybe his shooting numbers suffered a little bit because of it, right? When you got the ball in your hand and you're taking tougher shots. But I think like fit the same way that Jaquez slid right into a pretty good role-playing role. Carter, I think, could easily do the same thing.
Did you cover him in high school a little bit?
Yeah, maybe I saw him like play like once or twice. I don't think he ever like made like the state Final Four or anything, which is obviously like when I do most of my basketball coverage. But I think he got hurt maybe his senior year, like when they would have like had a chance to kind of really go on a run.
Yeah, it didn't seem like he was pegged as like this potential lottery pick out of
high school. He was like a top 100 recruit, maybe. I think the size was always a concern, right? And he was not a good shooter. His shooting numbers improved, like you said, dramatically.
Yeah.
So, if that is, he was I'm looking right now, number 87 player in the country. He actually finished up at Brewster. I forgot that he went to postgrad from Brewster.
Yeah.
I mean, if those shooting numbers are real, that jump is pretty significant, like a 10% improvement, I think. Then, like, it's hard to imagine he's not going to be a really good role player in the NBA. And then again, like, I kind of like the same way that Jaquez is probably never going to be like a go-to number, like a guy who runs your offense, but he proved, and Carter did the same thing at Providence, that like if you need a stretch here and there where someone's got to create, maybe a couple of guys are miss a game, and all of a sudden your number 3 option is going to be your number 1 option for a night. Like, he can do that too.
I know Derek White is obviously fringe all-star at this point, but do you feel like that's a decent comparison for Carter?
Yeah, I think those like defensive-minded, Derek White's obviously become a really good 3-point shooter, or at least in the playoffs. It feels like he never misses when he's open. But
especially end of the shot clock. I feel like end of the shot clock, he makes 100% of his threes. Yeah,
but I think like that type of guard is reasonable. Like, and I think this draft has gotten like a lot of heat. I was like, oh, it sucks at the top, but you can always find, I think, role play, like a guy like Derek White. So much of that is like situational. And I think you can definitely find like there's guys with like one skill or a handful of excellent skills that I think you can develop. And Carter, again, the 3-point shooting is going to be huge. That's a huge jump he had. But he did it on high volume, and while he had the ball in his hands a lot. So that's definitely encouraging, but that's going to be kind of the difference, I think, between him being like a guy who bounces around the league a lot and maybe like is not an everyday contributor, and a guy who could potentially be like a starter in the NBA.
Yeah. It's weird because I think the natural thing is to think, okay, you need to draft to help the offense, right? Because the offense has been so bad the last 2 years. But my mindset entering this draft, and we'll get deeper into it next week, but is I just think you got to draft a defender. You need to draft a perimeter defender. Because I just, again, if they lose, I'm like projecting here. I know the Heat don't necessarily always draft for need. Like they kind of draft the best guy available, or they try to thread the needle between the two. Of like they just don't draft strictly for need. That's not what the Heat does. I think we've seen that over the years. But I do think they're going to need perimeter defense because if they lose Caleb, like they probably will, and there's also a chance you could also lose Haywood. Your perimeter, all of a sudden you're thin, not only at the wing spot, but at like defenders, like wings who can defend, right? So that's why I think Devin Carter checks a box.
Yeah.
Of kind of like being he's a good player just overall, but also he fits a need. Another guy that I don't know if he's going to drop. He's another one that could be picked ahead of Miami. Is Ron Holland, who played at the G League Ignite last year. More of a wing, 6'6", 6'11" wingspan, younger. I don't even think he's 19. He's about to turn 19, I believe. Probably not as ready as Devin Carter, but he could definitely probably help on the defensive end, at least as a rookie. Offensively, still more of a work in progress, it appears. But I just think he would fit that need, again, like just kind of insurance. If in the case that you do lose both Caleb and Haywood, you're going to need somebody with that skill set who's long on the perimeter, who's athletic, who can defend. I think his defense is NBA ready. So he's another one. I don't know. I think at one point it was projected like top 3 or top 5 even last season. Now he's kind of fallen a little bit. I don't know if he'll fall all the way to 15, but if he's there, I think he's another guy that would make sense for the Heat.
Yeah, I think a couple other guys who are like kind of in that lottery range that I like for the Heat could maybe the late lottery type guys. Carlton Carrington from Pitt. Was really productive as a freshman. Maybe not a great 3-point shooter, but a good mid-range guy, just like bucket getter. If you're looking for a guy to improve the offense, I think he can help, and he's got pretty good size, I think, to be a shooting guard at least. Probably not a guy who's going to be defending at an insanely high level right away, but offensively he's really good, and I think pretty high ceiling. You mentioned Jared McCain, kind of like a shooter. Like I don't know. I don't know if he's going to give you the defensive stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say he doesn't do the defensive stuff that we might be looking for.
And he's not that big, and he's actually older for a guy who was a freshman. Like he's not. I think he's already 20. We'll see. Cody Williams is like. I think I don't expect him to fall, but
I doubt he'll be there. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the top teams are working him out. He did not really impress me in the tournament, but the tools are obviously like off the charts with him.
Tristan De Silva.
Tristan De Silva. Speaking of Colorado, he's I guess going back to if they're gonna have 2 paths they can go here, right? Whether they're gonna go with an old guy again, then and like kind of the win now type of guys. Obviously a younger guy can be a win now guy too, but like you've got to feel like you're really like still contending if you take a guy. I think like take someone like Carter or Zach Edey or De Silva, Tyler Kolek, who are a lot of the names you see floated for the Heat. De Silva, I think, I don't know. I honestly don't know how great his defense is, but I think he really interesting offensive skill set for a guy at his size, like a guy who can kind of like be a point guard at 6'8" a little bit.
He could shoot too,
and he's a good shooter too. Yeah,
which the Heat. You can never have enough of that, especially with the Heat's offense, right?
Yeah, I love his offensive game. He's older, 23 already, but I love his offensive game. I just don't know what his defense is going to be like.
It seems like just reading the scouting report, seems like he's not going to be like an elite defender, but he can hold up defensively. Like he's competitive on that end. He tries. He has the frame. Probably needs to add some more weight to be able to play like the 4, probably, which you might want him to do, right? I think he needs to add some more.
Colorado. Point guard and they had a good point guard also in KJ Simpson, but he brought the ball up a lot, like drove the offense. And when you get to the NBA, like he's just not going to have that same role. You can afford to put on some muscle and sacrifice some of like the fluidity on offense, I think, if it comes with it.
How do you feel about Khalil Ware?
I like him.
Big man from Indiana.
Yeah. He was really productive last year. Shot it well on like really small sample size, but shot it pretty well. And I think like the athleticism defense type. like I don't know if he's going to be a good offensive player. I know he was productive offensively, but I think in terms of if you're looking for that like rim protector, pick and roll guy, like I like a lot of what he can. As far as this draft goes, like there's not honestly a whole lot of those guys. Like Sarr's probably a little bit of that, but in terms of just like that Clint Capella type, I know it's not like the sexiest guy to get, but like that model of player, I think he's probably the most interesting guy in this draft, and all the way down at kind of like in the 20s in a lot of mock drafts. So it's not a great draft for those types of guys. So he might wind up being like, if that's the fit you want, like if that he feels a real fit, a different fit, I think, than a lot of these other guys we're talking about.
I think in theory he'd be really interesting. Just his skill set, like the fact that he can pick and pop, like you said, I know it's low volume, but he's shown the ability that he could shoot, right? Like he has good form, like he shot a pretty decent percentage from 3 on low volume, but I think if you scale it up, he might be decent enough that he can provide some spacing. He's a good roller, right? Yeah. 7'5" wingspan, good rim protector. Like just kind of a guy that might fit next to Bam if he pans out with his skill set. Like the type of big man you would want next to Bam. But like you read the scouting reports again, like which I'm kind of that's what I've been doing for the past few weeks of just trying to prepare for the draft. Mm-hmm. It's effort, it's focus, it's motor, like all those keywords that if you don't have that, like the Heat usually don't draft. Yeah. Right. So unless he's kind of like alleviated those concerns a little bit, I don't know if the Heat take him for those reasons. But I think in theory, if he could like if that isn't a problem, I think he's a really good fit. Kind of for what he like. They need to get bigger, right? Everyone's like they need to get bigger. Well, yes, I know Zach Edey is like the popular name, but as far as fit, Khalil Ware fits a lot better next to Bam than Zach Edey.
Yeah, Edey, you kind of got to be willing, and I like Edey. I would not be surprised if he has a good NBA career. You kind of got to be willing to like run an offense through him sometimes, right? Like that's his. He's not like a pick and roll guy.
Right.
He's pretty good. You can probably maybe do some pick and pop stuff because he's a pretty good shooter. For a guy at that size. But realistically, like if you draft Edey, you've got to be like saying for 7 to 10 minutes a game, like we're going to like kind of let him post up and you have to be willing to give him the ball in the post because that's his whole value. Right. Defensively, I think his rim protection is obviously going to be pretty special, but there's obviously a lot of weaknesses to his defensive game too. So I think you see it a lot with the Heat. Does not feel like it'd be a total pivot from everything they've done philosophically, like since Shaquille O'Neal played for this team. Yeah, Edey would.
Would Edey be the number 1 pick in the 1994 NBA draft?
Yeah, I mean, when did Yao go number 1? Like he would be number 1 in that draft. I guess Yao was a lot younger, but
I feel like he would be like number 1 pick in like almost every draft in the 90s.
Yeah,
just because he was so dominant, and like that's kind of what you.
Well, and he also would have come out. He would have come out of college a couple of years earlier too, right?
True.
At that point, because he would have been in. Like his stock has gone up. It feels like every year.
Yeah, that's fair.
So Ware and I guess Yves Missi, I don't know how to pronounce his name, from Baylor is the other guy who's in that same mold. Yeah. Ware was a better player than him last year, but
I just feel like those guys can't play with Bam. Like Missi and
right. So you like Ware because you think you're intrigued by the shooting.
Yeah, I don't know if he can play with Bam right away, but I think he can. Like, I can project him. Like if he pans out, I could project him as a guy who could play next to Bam. Which I think you have. Like if you're going, it's not a lottery pick, but it's right outside the lottery. It's a 15th pick. You're not just drafting a guy who's going to play 12 minutes a game when Bam's on the bench, right? Like,
right.
Ideally, you're drafting a starter or a guy who could play 20 plus minutes. If you're the backup center on the Heat behind Bam, you're playing 12 minutes a game because Bam is playing 36, 35. So that's why, again, I think Edey, like if they draft him, he's the backup center. Are you spending the 15th pick on the backup center? Probably not. So
an older guy too, right? Like it's one thing, like you said, to draft Ware and he's the backup center for a year, and then down the road develops into a guy who can really play with him. Like Edey, someone's got to like he's 22 years old. You don't draft 22-year-olds now unless you think they're going to be real contributors right away. It was the reason they felt good about taking Jaime Jaquez.
Yeah. That's fair.
And the difference between taking Jovic, right, who was like
19,
you knew he wasn't really going to play, but he was 18 years old when you took him. Speaking of Nikola Jovic, should we talk about Nikola Topic?
Sure. There's a few guards actually. Dillingham, Topic, and Isaiah Collier. I feel like are three guards that have been kind of linked to the Heat or mentioned or like in the Heat's range.
I'd be a little surprised if Dillingham falls. I think teams are going to really, like, I don't know. He's just really productive. Kentucky guards are, like, do not miss popular. Pretty much. Like, essentially, I went through because I was curious as I was trying to scout out the Wizards about how good, like, Reed Shepherd or Dillingham could be at number 2. I don't think Dillingham has a shot to go 2, but pretty much no Kentucky guard drafted in like the top 25 of the John Calipari era has been bad. Like even like the guys who are like kind of bust, like Malik Monk had a rough start to his career and turned into like a really good sixth man.
Sixth man.
So sure. I'd be a little surprised if Dillingham falls, but I mean, again, the Heat loves Kentucky guys, so if he somehow falls to 15, he'd be in the mix.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't know about the fit with Dillingham, but that's more like just a pure talent.
Yeah,
play.
Pure talent.
He's a 6'1" guard. I don't know if that, but he could put the ball in the basket. And
be a sixth man like right away and be good at it.
Yeah.
Topic is kind of the most interesting, I think, because there was a time, like literally like a month ago, when it was thought that he could maybe be the number 1 pick. He's had a lot of injury concerns and got hurt again last month, I think. But the comparison you see quite frequently for him is Goran Dragic, and he also has a name that is similar to Nikola Jovic, so it would be pretty funny if the Heat took him.
Not great on deadline between those two if they're both playing like big minutes.
A young guy too. I think be 19 when the season starts.
I again I think that's a pure talent play. Like he does kind of fit a need because you don't know what the guard situation is going to look like, what's going to happen with Tyler, what's going to happen with Terry Rozier.
Yeah, the Heat still don't really. They have not had a like true point guard pretty much. No. Like even Rozier is more of a combo guard.
Yeah, I guess Kyle, right? But like even Kyle's not a guy who's going to.
True, I forgot about Kyle Lowry.
Averaged 12 assists a game, right? Like Topic feels like a true point guard who's like playmaker first.
Yes.
Probably going to average, if he plays 30 minutes a game, close to 10 assists. Like it just seems like he's that type of guy. The question is on defense, right? Like that, again, you already have some defensive quote-unquote liabilities on the court with this current roster. But Topic, again, I think it's more of a long play, but if you are projecting him to be part of a core of like, say, Tyler Hero or even Terry Rozier, Topic has a negative wingspan like Tyler did when he came out of the draft. That usually doesn't equate to a great defender, right? When you don't have a good shorter wingspan than your actual height. He's not he's 6'6", 200 pounds, not a huge guy as far as like bulk. So he's gonna get that's just natural. He's gonna get picked on in the NBA. Mm-hmm. So can he hold up? I think that's the big question mark. Offensively, if he could stay healthy, it seems like he has the tools to be a good offensive player, especially if he can develop a better outside shot. But as far as getting to the rim, passing the ball as a passer, obviously very interesting as a prospect.
He and Collier are maybe the two most interesting upside guys that he could potentially wind up with at 15. Topic, again, like a lot of, obviously, and Collier, the name is true for both of them. Both at one time thought to be potential number 1 picks.
Yeah.
Collier had a rocky season at USC.
He was a number 1 prospect, right? Coming out of high school? Collier?
I think maybe in some rankings. He was like the National Player of the Year, I think, in high school. Could not really be like more different than Nikola Topic in a lot of ways. Nikola Topic, who's all skin and bones and arms and legs, and Isaiah Collier is built like Derrick Henry, essentially.
6'3", 205.
Yeah, a guy who's just gonna like crash in. Like I don't know. Like the ideal outcome is like he's Russell Westbrook, right? Like that is probably it's not gonna probably not going to be Russell Westbrook, but that's the mold of type of player he's going to be. So yeah, I think the Heat are going to be in a position, maybe we'll talk more about this next week. They got to figure out what Jimmy Butler's future is. And that I think could influence a lot of do you take a swing on a guy like Topic or Collier or Jacoby Walters, another guy we haven't mentioned, who is a guy kind of it's a little surprised he's not thought of more highly. Baylor freshman who averaged 14 points a game last year. Or so are you going to go for one of those 18, 19-year-olds, or do you feel comfortable taking another 21 or 22 or 23-year-old because you're still trying to like maximize the Jimmy Butler era?
It feels like whoever they pick might be like a good indication of like what
Of
their
what
plan
they,
is for the
yes,
next year, or even
exactly.
for the next season. Like I think we're gonna get a lot of insight of like what the front office is thinking based on what they do with the pick, or maybe they trade the pick, right? Like maybe they
Yeah.
traded for a player that can impact like immediately, like a guy who in his fifth year that becomes available on the trade market that we don't even know
Mhm.
at this point. Like maybe they trade it. So I would think they would keep the pick because it could be a cost-effective contract. It's very
Yeah.
valuable in today's NBA with like the new restrictive CBA and especially with the Heat's high payroll. But if the opportunity becomes available where the pick you could turn the pick into an all-star caliber talent, right?
Yeah.
That's in the NBA now. I mean, I'm sure the Heat would consider it. So I think the big like just like the main thing is there are a lot of different ways they could go at 15, and also they have the second round pick too, which probably get to more next week, David.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to get a good indication of what the front office is thinking based on that first round pick and where they keep it. If they do keep it, who do they select? What position do they go for? Do they go for an older guy? Do they go for more of a project? I think it's going to tell us a lot.
Yeah. I think maybe next week we should come in and like rank our favorite guys in
Sure.
the range because
Okay.
there's so many names to talk about. We got to start focusing in on some, and hopefully we'll have a better idea of who's actually going to be there when the Heat pick 15.
I gave away mine with Devin Carter, but that doesn't mean it can't change in a week. I mean,
I know, and we don't
I could
know
be
that much
swayed.
about these guys. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be swayed. I could watch a YouTube video and be swayed.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos the last couple of days, mostly for the top guys, but
Yeah, you're for the Wizards.
I'll get to both. Yeah. All right, should we wrap up real quick with the Panthers minute?
Yeah.
Oh, here's my McDavid take. I think he's the most impressive athlete I've ever seen in person.
Wow.
I never really saw prime LeBron. I should.
I was gonna say, have you
like,
seen
I
LeBron
wasn't here
play?
in Miami. I saw like late career LeBron.
That's I'm trying to think like who else would be in the I mean Shaq at his size.
Yeah, I guess Shaq. I probably saw in Miami. I don't know if I ever saw him play for the Lakers, but the other one is Messi, honestly.
Oh, Messi, yeah, that's true.
That was and they're honestly the most similar because it's like just like all of a sudden they have the ball or puck in one spot and all of a sudden they're like past everyone and you don't quite understand how they did it.
I'm trying to think of football, like Derrick Henry.
Yeah, football's hard. Like we saw
DK Metcalf.
the Super Bowl.
DK Metcalf.
DK Metcalf. Like I saw Mahomes win a Super Bowl in person, but like quarterbacks are different, right?
Yeah.
I mean Lamar. I guess Lamar is up there.
I mean that's fair. I mean the way that McDavid just carves through like three defenders.
Like it's unbelievable.
Crazy.
The assist he had on the power play to Corey Perry last night was like insane.
That was right on par with the other goal he scored that like kept being played repeatedly. I think in the series before against Dallas where he like scored a goal between like three different guys
in the clinching game of that series. Yeah.
There was a pass. There was a pass that he made in one of the games in Edmonton. It was like between the goalie's legs to his teammate that should have been a goal, but I don't think the guy didn't finish the play. Like he didn't score, but like it was an incredible pass. He literally passed it between Bobrovsky's legs and got it to his teammate for basically like an easy goal, and he didn't finish it, but it was impressive. Yeah, he's definitely I know kind of joking about it before with Greg Cody and his take of McDavid being overrated. My colleague, I don't know if he's overrated after seeing what I saw in Game 5, and honestly in the series and in the playoffs. Like, he's just been great.
Yeah. Are you worried about the Panthers at all?
If I had to do a 1 of 10, like panic meter, 10 being like extremely panicked, I would say like 6. I still obviously would rather be the Panthers. They have 2 shots to win 1 game. I think the Panthers are still the better team.
I'd still be pretty surprised if they don't win.
I agree. I would be surprised. But saying that, like, Edmonton's favored in Game 6. They're home.
Mm-hmm. That
arena, or if you want to put it in hockey terms, that barn is going to be crazy in Game 6. So if Edmonton like does what they're supposed to and wins that game, all of a sudden you're a team that was up 3-0 is coming back home for Game 7, but with no momentum. Edmonton has all the momentum. They probably have the best player in the series. Yeah, at that point, like, probably be a 9 if they lose game 6 and they have to come back here and have to face a game 7. Yes, it's at home, but with zero momentum after losing 3 straight. All right, how concerned are you? You were there
I think like
night.
a 5. Like, again, I still think they win this series. You just don't screw up on the special team stuff last night. You win. Like they were really good for the entire second half of that game. And honestly, the first 5 minutes of the game, they were like, I was like, oh, they're gonna they look like a team that's about to win the Stanley Cup, and then they give up the shorthanded goal, and it just kind of spiraled. So you can't just like have a terrible mistake that like deflates. Really, I mean, in this case, it wouldn't be deflate, but like really ignites the Edmonton crowd right away and gets you on your heels. I think Matthew Tkachuk being really good in the second half of that game is very encouraging because he's been very quiet. He's slow compared to that's obviously has never been his strength. He's looked slow, but you wonder like, can he turn it up basically for a full game and give you that kind of effort and just try to finish it out on Friday.
The fact that the Oilers have more goals when the Panthers are on the power play
than the Panthers do. Not ideal.
That's not ideal, and it's crazy that Panthers are even up in the series when you like read that. It's like when you think about it, like how are the Panthers even leading 3-2, considering they have 1 power play goal and the Oilers have 2 shorthanded goals in the series. Like that's kind of tells you everything you need to know about like how things have gone when it's 5-on-5, right? Like when it's 5-on-5, the Panthers have been very good in the series.
Yeah.
But it's just, like you said, the special teams has been an issue. So I still think they win the series, like you said. But man, if this comes to game 7, it comes down to game 7, that's a lot of Panthers fans are gonna be very, very nervous.
My one concern coming in the series is that, I was like, the Panthers are better, but Connor McDavid, if he's an all-time great, he's gonna start winning them eventually. And obviously, if he pulls this off, he jumps way up already in the all-time list, which I think we all expect him to wind up there eventually.
Do you know when the last time a team came back from 3-0 in the series in the Stanley Cup Finals? Do you know?
4 or something.
Yeah. So it's like 100 years ago. So it doesn't happen often.
It only happened once in the final.
It's happened. I know it's happened before in
1942.
Okay.
Transpose the numbers. It's happened 4 times ever, but twice since 2010. The Flyers did it in the East Finals in 2010, and the Kings did it in the first round against the Sharks in 2014, and then went on to win the Stanley Cup. They had an insane. I think they won the most elimination games.
Wow.
They just kept being up against it and coming back. So yeah,
the Panthers came back from 3-1 in the Bruins last year.
3-1. Yeah, 3-1.
Yeah, I mean at this point 3-2. Again, if the Oilers find a way to win game 6 and force a game 7 in Sunrise, I don't know. What would your panic meter be at that point?
Like a 8. I mean, then it feels like it's just a 50-50 shot, right? At that point.
Or even worse, because again, the other team has won 3 straight and you have lost 3 straight. I know it's at home, but still, what is that? I mean, in hockey, home ice advantage is not as big as other sports. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. At least it's created some. I feel like we were just most Panthers fans were just oh, we're gonna cruise this Stanley Cup. We've won the first 3. It's gonna be maybe in 5, but it's definitely created some drama here this series. So I guess that's fun to a neutral observer.
Yeah. All right, we've gone very long. We'll be back next week. We will talk more about the draft. We'll maybe be talking about the Panthers Stanley Cup. We'll be talking about the Panthers either way, I guess. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. We will both be watching a lot of YouTube for the next couple of days.
Should be fun. It's that time of the year.
All right. Thanks again. We'll talk to you guys next week.